Hello everyone, what is up? It's me, Ewan from WhatCulture Gaming, and by now it's fair to say that most who picked up Red Dead 2 on launch will have finally, at long last, completed the story. It spans over 60 hours in length, but it's so good that, even when you spent that long exploring every nook and cranny, as well as having your heart being ripped out by the story, you'll find yourself coming back for more. In its current form, Red Dead Redemption 2 exists solely as a single-player experience, but that'll change by the end of the month. Red Dead Online, Rockstar's answer to GTA Online, will launch by the end of November and looks to be every bit the money-making behemoth its predecessor was, even without all those fancy cars and gold-plated jets to invest in. But that leaves Rockstar in a bit of a pickle, because Red Dead Redemption 2 had a genuinely magnificent cast, and one that shouldn't be forgotten about by the time the credits begin to roll. We all know how John Marston's story ends, of course, and though single-player DLC is pretty much going the way of the dodo, save for the valiant efforts of Insomniac Games with Spider-Man's The City That Never Sleeps, there's a story evidently worth expanding on in Red Dead, and it all revolves around one character in particular, Sadie Adler. It probably doesn't need repeating, but just in case you were under any illusions that this would be a spoiler-free look at Red Dead, you'd be wrong, so look away now if you haven't finished the story. Please. Sadie Adler's turn from a victim of the Old West into one of its most resilient actors may have been sudden, but by the time the story of Arthur Morgan and John Marston had come to a close, she managed to win over the hearts of everyone concerned, and set herself up for a very interesting story, that of her venturing to Latin America in some Butch and Sundance-esque pilgrimage. As a side, go watch that movie. Ms. Adler may have been an outlaw during her time with Dutch, but by the time we meet her in 1907, she was, mostly, on the straight and narrow, collecting bounties and touring around the saloons of West Elizabeth and New Austin. Of course, bounty hunting itself isn't a unique concept for Adler, but she certainly took it from a new position as a professional bounty killer, unlike Arthur and John, who merely dabbled in the business to make ends meet. One can assume she won't be hanging up her 6-shooters heading south either, and given that most of the first Red Dead Redemption's map is accessible in-game, it's not difficult to imagine that Rockstar may have plans to work Mexico in somewhere else along the way too. Ojo del Diablo is visible from the southernmost point of New Austin, and with the studio having gone to great pains to create a space largely devoid of inhabitants, surely it must serve a greater purpose. In short, Adler was a fantastic character, and there is still evidently more left to tell, not just with her story, but of Rockstar's fictitious Old West setting too. Have Sadie travel further and further south as the DLC progresses, utilising familiar locales from the first Red Dead and potentially others too, and you have the perfect bookend to one of the prequel's breakout stars. Not that they'll be making it anytime soon though. You see, Red Dead Online is both a blessing and a curse. On the upside, it'll allow players to fully live out their cowboy fantasies with their friends in an avatar of their own making. The only major caveat, currently, foregoing the prospect of microtransactions for just 1 second, is that I'll almost certainly spell the end of any single-player DLC ever making its way to Red Dead Redemption 2. Just as it did with GTA 5. Plans for a single-player expansion to the 5th installment in the Grand Theft Auto series were well documented after its initial release, with a 2014 post from Rockstar's Newswire even teasing, and I quote, "some very exciting story mode DLC." Sadly, these plans never came to fruition, and the culprit responsible was the title's online component, which was said to be hauling in millions of dollars on a weekly basis at its peak. If Red Dead Online turns out the same way, and it almost surely will, then we can say goodbye to ever seeing additional story content ever coming to Red Dead Redemption 2, and say hello to Take-Two lavishing their dollar around like Jack Nicholson from Batman 1989. It's a harsh reality, but one players will surely have to reconcile with as Red Dead evolves in the coming weeks and months ahead. Most publishers just don't seem to be interested in single-player content anymore, and even if Rockstar were interested in expanding on Red Dead's story, it looks to be taking a more undead route, as per the supernatural Easter eggs we've seen in the game thus far. At the very least, we can hope that Sadie Adler will appear somewhere else down the line, or perhaps even cameo in online in some way. Until then, however, brace yourselves, Red Dead fans. Online is on the way, and it's going to change the series from the ground up.